and good afternoon to all of our attendees. I am Brittany Hale, and I am the founder and CEO of BND Consulting Group, where we bring humanness to organizational design. Now, I got started as an attorney and really kind of got frustrated with coming in after the bad decisions were made. And so with BND Consulting Group, BND stands for Be Nobody's Darling, and that informs our approach to work. We help organizations develop authentic, values-led identities within their industry. And today we are going to do that by helping you learn how to cultivate safer spaces in the workplace. Now, this is going to be interactive, so I'm going to ask you if you can grab a pen and paper, and then we are going to share my screen, and I just want to make sure that you can see it. So drop in the chat if you're able to see it, just a quick yes. That's all I'll need, and then we will be on our way. All right. So I'm just gonna, if you can see it, excellent, we'll get started. Now, the first thing before we get started, cultivating safer spaces means that we are going to discuss some uncomfortable topics. We're going to discuss bias. We're going to discuss all of the things that kind of make you get a little bit uncomfortable, but I promise you it's to grow you. It's to stretch our understanding a little bit. So if you can agree with me that this is a safe space to ask the hard questions, drop a yes in the chat. I'm gonna wait until I get that from our attendees. I love working with my clients. And the one thing that I always tell them is we will ask you to do the hard thing. We are never gonna ask you to do it alone. So if you agree that this is a safe space, I agree that we can talk about some of these difficult topics without anyone getting offended, without anyone really losing that understanding, and we'll keep going. Okay, so I think we have, do we have some yeses in here? I'd love for you to enter that into the chat, and we'll go ahead and proceed. So again, safe space. I encourage you to ask questions. Make sure you get out that pen and paper because again, we are going to have an interactive section. So what are we here to do? First, we're going to define bias. We're going to examine our own internal biases and its impact on the workplace. Next, we're going to identify the most common pain points of changing company infrastructure. Okay, so when you're thinking about your organization like a house, right? Your company culture, that's your foundation. Okay, and we're going to examine what culture means, why that's so important, ways to change it, and discuss strategies to leverage your current company culture. Then, of course, if you have any questions, please let me know. Drop them in the chat, and we will move forward. Okay, so what's a bias? All right, broadly speaking, our bias is a prejudice for or against something, okay? And our biases affect our perception, our attitudes, our behaviors, even our listening skills. All right, now, when we think about biases, think about this. What do we know to be true about ourselves? Now, you can drop it in the chat if you choose to share. I'll share one thing I know to be true about myself is that I'm an early bird, okay? I am going to bed very early and rising very early. So that's something I know to be true about myself. Now, what do we believe to be true about others? Typically, if I encounter other people who are early birds, I'm more likely to think that they are industrious, that they are hardworking, that they are competent in their fields. Okay, and so these are just some of the things that we experience. Now, what's interesting about bias is that our internal biases affect our external actions. Now, you may have heard of the term microaggression, right? And that sounds really kind of scary, but when we're thinking about microaggressions, all that's saying is our brains are using information, right? They're using our internal biases to communicate, whether we're conscious of that or not. So a micro bias could be turning your head away from someone who's speaking to you because you're acting on a bias, right? Maybe you don't like the way they look. Maybe you have a preconceived notion that they are less competent or less intelligent. And so you're communicating to them that you're acting on that bias. Conversely, we have micro affirmations. Many of us are familiar with microaggressions, but micro affirmations, and those are when people feed positively toward our internal biases and we communicate that. So that can be a head nod as someone's speaking. That could be turning toward them to listen to them speak. That could be smiling as they're speaking, maintaining eye contact. Okay, these are those moments where we're getting those that communication about biases. Now, we're always going to be biased toward ourselves, right? We have an ego, we have to be able to operate in the world, and we want to protect ourselves, right? So our brains are making very quick decisions about other people and situations that we encounter. Ultimately, it serves to keep us safe. But the issue with that is very often we're fed misinformation, and that misinformation informs our biases, which then informs the way that we operate in life. And personally, it informs that, and professionally as well, right? And we're here to figure out ways to create safer spaces in the workplace. And so that's why we're going to examine these biases. So I've got a few examples here for you, and we're going to go through them. First, of course, is beauty bias, right? And very simply, we love beautiful people, all right? We tend to think that people who have greater amounts of facial symmetry, who present in a way that we deem socially acceptable or adhere to the beauty standards in our society, we think that they're smarter. We think that they are more competent than other people, okay? We are more likely to want to associate with them, to support them, all right? And maybe you've been aware of this or not, but about 60% of CEOs, overwhelmingly white males, but over 60% of them are over 6 feet tall. Okay, really kind of quirky, something that I found interesting. But why that's interesting to me is that as a whole in America, only about 15% of the population is over 6 feet. So when we look at these people in these leadership positions, we see that they are overrepresented in these leadership positions because of our biases, right? We tend to believe that tall men are better leaders, right? Better suited for this leadership role, should be in charge. And that's an example of a beauty bias, okay? We tend to believe that people who are smaller, have smaller frames, right, are healthier. We think that they care more about themselves than others. And very often that plays into who we speak to at work, right? Who we might give projects to, who we trust, okay? And who, again, we believe is competent to perform their roles. So that's the first one. Next, we have on our affinity bias. And quite simply, we like people who look like us. Is that born out of some sort of malicious intent? No. Most of the time, that's what we do, right? So now is the moment where I would like you to take your pen and your paper, and I would like for you to write out the 10 closest people in your network. The 10 closest people in your network. And I'll give you a moment to fill that out. And we're going to figure something out here. So I just want to make sure that we have everyone here participating. So again, when we are looking at those 10 people, let me know if you're done. Type done in the chat, and then we can proceed with the activity. For some people, I know very often they're like, oh, I have to think about it. I'm not quite sure. But we don't have anyone saying done yet. I'm going to give it another moment. We want to make sure that you're writing down again the 10 people that are closest to you in your network. Excellent. So I think we have one. Okay. So if you're done, excellent. Drop it in the chat. If you are not done, look at the ones that you have. Now, I'm going to ask you to either enter into the chat or raise your hand. Raise your hand if a majority of the people on your list share the same gender expression as you. So if you identify as a woman, if you identify as a male, the 10 closest people in your network, if a majority of them share the same gender expression as you, raise your hand. Or again, you can enter it into the chat. Next, I'd like you to look at that list and raise your hand if your 10 closest people in your network share the same race background as you. Okay? Do a majority of the 10 closest people to you share the same racial background as you? Next. Okay. Excellent. Leah said 6 out of 10. Lewis says yes. Leslie says yes. Leah said yes. 8 out of 10, right? Now, looking again, let's see. Raise your hand. Enter it into the chat. If a majority of the people in your 10 closest network, the 10 closest people in your network, if they share the same or similar educational background as you. Okay. Again, I'm going to see if a majority of the people share the same educational background as you. And finally, I'm going to ask, do a majority of the people that are on your list, do they live? Lewis said yes. Excellent. And in many ways, that can make a lot of sense, right? If you're an attorney, you're going to know a lot of lawyers. But our last question, Leah says 4 out of 10, they share the same educational background, although others are similar. Perfect. And the last thing is, raise your hand, enter it into the chat if a majority of the people on your list live in the same or similar communities as you. Okay, do they live in the town? Do they also live in a suburb or rural area? Okay, Leslie says she doesn't know. That makes sense. Okay, if you know them just professionally through work, maybe you haven't been to one another's homes. But do you see where we're going here? Do you see where we're going with this? Now, with affinity bias, it's not Leah says 10 out of 10 live in the same general community as me. Makes a lot of sense, right? Now, most of you, if I ask you, is this coming from your this sort of diabolical sense to exclude other people? Most of you would say no. Lewis said 50 out of 50. And so that is the point, right? We want to make sure that when you're thinking of these biases, affinity bias is the number one internal bias that we have. We see people who look like us. Maybe they like the same things that we do, And so we want to hang out with them, right? We want to work with them. And there's not anything inherently wrong with that. However, once we begin acting on that and believing that the only type of people who are competent, the only type of people who can do the job or, work in our space are people who look like us, that's where these issues start coming in. Next, we have the halo and horns effect, and it's exactly what it sounds like, where one aspect of an individual clouds our understanding of them. Now, this could be fairly innocuous, such as your alma mater, right? You know that you went to a great law school, you know that you went to a great grad school, and so someone else who went to that same school, you're thinking, I had a great education, right? So surely this person has the same level of competency, the same skills that I do, okay? You may have that. However, maybe they belong to the same fraternity or sorority that you do. But then you also have the horns effect. And that's where one aspect of someone's character, who they are, overshadows everything else. So sometimes this could be if someone speaks with a stutter, right? We're likely to think they're less intelligent. If someone speaks with an accent, right? We're likely to think that they are less intelligent. And if they belong to a sorority or fraternity, if at some point we see that they have some sort of affiliation with a religious group or something like that, that's where our biases come in and we say, this person's not going to work with us. And last, but certainly not least, we've got the halo and horns. Next, we're moving into our confirmation bias. And again, we are designed to protect our egos. We never want to think that we're wrong. And so with the confirmation bias, we think we're right and we look and search for indicators to confirm that. So if I see, again, I shared a truth that I'm an early riser, right? So for me, if I also see that Sue's an early riser, even if she gets half as much work done as Leah, I'm going to look for any reason to deem why that's so, right? Okay, but Sue gets in here really early, and therefore I know that she's working really hard, right? She's taking more time. She may get half as much work done, but that's because she's getting up really early. She's taking more time with these projects, and I know for a fact that she's producing better work than Leah, okay? So that's that confirmation bias. We may not actually be looking at the facts as they are, but instead forming a hypothesis and looking for facts to suit our hypothesis. And finally, we have that contrast bias. And this is the bias that most negatively impacts workspaces. And that's where we compare the performance of employees to one another rather than to the company standard. So using the early bird late owl example, if I get in every day at 6:30 and Sue and I arrive at the parking lot at the same time, and I always see her, she gets in her office the same time I do, and Lewis comes in at 7:30. Okay, if I am responsible for reviewing Sue and Lewis's work, now maybe they performed in the exact same way, maybe they had the same level of competence, the same output, but I'm comparing, I'm saying, oh, well, Lewis comes in later than Sue. Lewis he's just not as industrious as she is, right? Now, our company may indicate that everybody needs to be in at 8 a.m., right? So really no one's in violation of any sort of company policy. Everyone is working harder and showing up a bit more than what's expected. But for this particular situation, that's where that contrast bias happens. And this happens a lot. And it's informed, right, by our affinity biases, by our beauty biases. We end up comparing employees and against one another rather than developing an independent standard. So How does the bias impact the workplace? Now, employees who observe bias are nearly 3 times as likely to be disengaged in the workplace. Now, disengaged employees are going to cost companies about $500 billion a year. And I want you to think about something. Studies have shown that with just an extra 15 minutes of productivity, employees can increase an organization's revenue by 1%. I'll say that again. With just an extra 15 minutes of productivity, right? That's the difference between taking a lap around the office or, taking a lap around the building, right? Just 15 minutes of engagement can increase your organization's revenue by 1%. So if you're making over $1 million, that's an extra $30,000. So when you're thinking about bias, when you're thinking about strategy, it's worth it to have this conversation. Because if your employees become disengaged because they say, well, Lewis has his favorites, so why should I even try? Right? Lewis only likes people who went to the same school he did. Sorry, Lewis, I know I'm picking on you, but for the purposes of this example, right? When we have these opportunities, we see that on a grand scale, it is costing money. And the most important part is that bias, the impact of this bias is that you're overlooking talent. You don't want to do that. Okay? So let's look at how we can change this. Now, what's culture? And I've shown this picture of sort of culture in a can because I think very often organizations have this belief in a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's just not accurate. Okay, so when we think about how do you define culture? Now, spoiler alert, culture is not ping pong tables and kombucha on tap, okay? That's not what we're talking about. You may think of Google, you may think of, other organizations that have these really defined, really intentional cultures, okay? I think about Bloomberg in New York City, and their elevators only stop every 3 floors because unless you have some sort of disability that prevents you from walking, right? They want to encourage people being active and walking, right? So when you're thinking about culture, really, it's a framework for decision making. How are you making decisions within your organization? So earlier I talked about culture really being the infrastructure, really being that foundation of your organization. If your organization is a house, it needs to be built on culture. You need to figure out and be clear about how do we clearly define and operationalize our decision making, right? Now, many of us will have sort of these very nice pages on our organization's website that'll say, this is what we stand for and these are our values. But very often, not always, but very often, there's a gap between those aspirational values and your operational strategy. And that is where the disengagement happens. That is where you're losing your employees, okay? So when you think about how you define culture, you may have your own definition, but again, it's all boils down to how do you make decisions within your organization. There are hundreds of thousands of companies, right? Even within various industries, right? In the law, you think about law firms. So that's fine, but each law firm is going to make decisions very differently. So I would charge you with this question. How do you define your organization's culture? And if you feel like responding, definitely do so. If you're not comfortable, that's fine. But as you take this with you, this should be something that's on your mind, okay? And I understand for many of you, I may be the only thing between you and your happy hour, but it's a question worth having. Okay? And so when we're thinking about culture, that's the question that we're having because your employees are watching, right? Okay, Leslie says hospitable. That's awesome. Okay, and whether you think you have a culture or not, and I've seen this, I've had clients in the public space, private space, in government, right? And government employees do not think of, you tell them they have a culture and they're like, what are you talking about? And very often we have a belief about local government, right? Or disengaged employees or people who may be a little less professional than we would like, right? So when we have these moments, when we're thinking about culture, it's worth having that conversation. What do we stand for? Why do we make decisions this way? If we make decisions this way because that's how it's always been, is that enough? Okay, are we seeing a positive impact on our organization based on the way that we make decisions? Because if that's how it's always been, that's great, but is it working? Okay, so that's the question that I would pose to you as far as that. So now when we think about these pain points that I see most commonly, clearly defining values. Again, what do you stand for? Okay, your C-suite, very often, they can spout the values all day. But middle management, right? Do your supervisors, and most importantly, the employees, right? What are the values of the organization? A majority of the time, they have no idea. Okay, a misalignment of values, and that's where we get that gap, right? We have the aspirational values, and be clear, there are some values that will always be aspirational because you're always having to refine, you're always having to deal with new issues. Okay, many of us did not have a pandemic on our scorecard of, life for 2020. But being able to respond in accordance with your values, okay, that should be your kind of what's guiding you and guiding your operational strategy, right? How do you turn them from aspirational to operational? So again, if integrity is something that you value, or consideration is something that you value, how does that work? Can you really say that you're valuing consideration as an organization, and in let's say April 2020, you're requiring everyone to come into the office and not wear masks, right? And so I use that as an example because there are some organizations that really just don't get that. And so when you have that misalignment, that's where you breed that contempt with employees, unfortunately, right? Where they say, oh, yes, great. They treat you like family, but they didn't say which family member, right? It's, we're the outcasts, right? They treat us like the second cousin of the group. So when we're thinking about these pain points, it's that misalignment of values where you get a lot of disengagement, very often scaling too quickly. Growing is good, but in the beginning, it's easy to sort of have this all hands on deck situation and everyone's working together. However, once you're on that hockey stick trajectory, once you start scaling, all hands on deck doesn't work when you're dealing with more than 100 employees or 1,000 employees, okay? And that's really where you get these situations where people, because you haven't clearly defined values, because there's a misalignment, you scale too quickly and your framework for decision making is a bit scattered. It's a bit fractured, okay? And that's where you have managers making decisions that are independent of what the organization stands for, and ultimately results in some sort of employee discrimination suit, or an opportunity for people to just kind of, and as an attorney, being on the back end of that, I'm kind of scratching my head and saying, why would you do that, right? Why would you think of things that way? But very often it's because they haven't had that support, right? They haven't had those check-ins, and management very often says, look, I trusted them, right? We were growing really quickly. I trusted them to do what needed to be done. And unfortunately, they just didn't do it in the same way that I would have loved for them to. And last, strategic and operational misalignment. What do I mean when I say this? So there are many organizations that have adopted a particular business strategy, and that may work for them, but where they fail is that their strategy cannot be supported by their internal operations. So we think about a lot of organizations who have, let's say, a growth strategy. Now they are focused on scaling, right? We gotta scale, right? We gotta, everyone needs to know us. Everyone needs to know within the Hudson Valley, we want to have the monopoly. We want to be the number one bankruptcy firm, right? Or, we need to have a disproportionate presence within our industry within this region. Very often, you will focus on scaling at the cost of the quality of your internal company culture. Okay, so that often will result in underperformance, just doing the bare minimum to try to get by because you're just so overwhelmed. It can result in the loss of talent, right? I've got to look for another job because I can't keep working like this. Okay, we know that 1 in 4 employees plans to leave post-pandemic. All right, so you've got this talent tsunami that's coming and many people are not prepared. And when we think about the end of the pandemic, what does that really mean? Most people are thinking around Labor Day, and that's when a lot of return to work strategies are happening, right? Most people are being asked to come back into the office full time by Labor Day. And we know that 25% of these people are saying, see you later. Right? I'd rather quit or do something else than to come back into the office. So it's worth having the discussion and saying, how's our strategy connecting to our operations? Does it support our operations? If it doesn't, what can we do about that? Okay. I'm thinking about cost leadership. Now, if your model is cost leadership, then you want to produce at the lowest cost, and you may compensate internally with operational excellence, right? Because you know that you're avoiding waste. You want to make sure that your employees are treated well, that externally people are coming to you because you're producing at the lowest cost, and they know that. And you're going to get a lot of volume. And because you have that, you want to treat your employees well to make sure that they can keep up. Does that make sense? I'm speaking very quickly. I'm from Jersey. You got to forgive me. But these are the pain points that I see most often across industries. And it's something that I wanted to bring to your attention. Maybe you aren't, but it's always nice to be aware of them. So then we're looking at the ways to leverage the current culture. First is a values discovery and alignment session. Now this can be done through a workshop. Very often I'll come in, I'll do a company culture assessment, right? And in those 2 weeks, we will evaluate from the top down, from the bottom up, to figure out where those gaps are and ways to address it. If you haven't been clear on what you stand for, right? Maybe you're at the head of your organization and you're like, we've been taken by surprise. Okay, you want to check in because your disgruntled employees, your disaffected employees, they're not fading out into the ether, right? They are creating communities through social media. They are creating support. And they're having that conversation. And even if you think you are, I would always rather be leading the conversation than to be the victim of it, right? So when you have these opportunities, the way to leverage your current culture is just to check in, right? We say this is what we stand for, but do we really? Is there an opportunity for us to take this and push it a bit further, right? Maybe we don't have a stance on inclusion. Maybe we really don't know what that means. Okay, maybe we're thinking of inclusion along racial lines, but we haven't considered gender expression. Okay, we haven't considered sexuality and whether or not we are being inclusive to our employees who are, expressing their sexuality in a number of ways. So that's the opportunity to have a values discovery and alignment reflection. Next is to have communication from the top down and the bottom up. Now, I get it. We have C-suites and partners and people in charge for a reason, and that's important, right? Your leadership is ultimately accountable. But it makes no sense for our leaders not to be aware of what's happening. And if we look at entertainment, right, we see Ellen a year ago. Ellen was everyone's darling, right? And in the months after, due to communities online, right, due to disgruntled employees garnering the attention of and the support of the public, right, because there was no communication, okay, they're making complaints and all of these things are going. And yes, we know that Ellen's backed by a larger production company, but the point is that a year later, this person who was a media darling and the head of the cultural zeitgeist is ousted. Okay, so when we think about that communication and her reaction to it, her response was, I didn't know. I didn't know. Now, it's not, the Warner Media show, right? It's the Ellen show, right? Her fans, her followers, right? They're forming the connection with her. So the workplace that she provides through this connection, she's to be held accountable for. Anytime we see CEOs in headlines for toxic work environments, I didn't know is not a sufficient response. And so if you can avoid that by creating opportunities for communication, it's so important. It's so vital. And you can do that through anonymous feedback. We don't want to risk anyone, charging retaliation for speaking their mind, but we can have anonymous feedback. And again, if you're doing a cultural assessment, if you have a third party coming in to touch base and say, hey, marketing's doing a great job, but sales, they're kind of struggling. Okay, sales needs some more support. They need a touchstone. They need to know what their goals are, what their targets need to be for the rest of 2021 and going into 2022. All right, that can happen through anonymous feedback. Allow these employees to speak a bit more freely. Now, it's not a wish list, right? We're not telling everyone that this is, you're going to get everything that you want, but again, you're providing the environment with information and it inspires trust, right? Because more often than not, people want to be heard. They are validated by being heard. And to say, I hear you, or at the very least, I'm interested in listening, that goes a long way to create engagement and to extend your employee's life cycle. Next is blind recruiting. Now, again, if you're looking to create more diverse opportunities, if you're looking to create more diverse spaces within your workplace, blind recruiting can go a long way. Because again, if you see a particular name, our internal biases are at work, right? We may have an affinity bias towards someone who has the same last name as us. We may have a horns effect bias towards someone who has a particular last name or first name that we may infer means that they come from a particular background. And so when you take all of that out of it, biases will never go away, but we can flag them, right? And the point is to have that internal conversation with yourself, to flag it and say, this is what I'm doing, right? Because that's how you create safer spaces, is where you create the opportunity to pause for a moment and say, okay, I got it. I see what I did there. And so when you blind recruit, that's that opportunity. Now, obviously, you're going to bring them in, but very often we will see someone's background and say, wow, this is actually really impressive. This is interesting. I did not know this about this person. So by the time that they're they're coming into interview, perhaps we already see them in the role. And we've lessened our bias against them, therefore creating the opportunity to create diverse workspaces and ultimately move towards these safer spaces. And lastly, know what you don't know. Life happens, people happen, right? But the point is to protect yourself. And the way that you can do that, protecting your employees, you want to create safer spaces because we know statistically that people who receive this information are going to perform better. Okay, by 2025, we're less than 5 years out. Millennials are going to be 75% of the global workforce, okay, across the globe. And by 2030, that's going to be there's going to be 30% Gen Zers, okay? Now, what that means is what the talent in the workforce wants is going to be changing because their wants, their needs, right? Developing some sort of intergenerational communications strategy is vital because you don't know what's coming ahead, right? But if you can get ahead of it and say, you know, we want to attract great talent, but maybe we're having difficulty with this. So what can we do to meet people halfway? And I know everyone will tell you, millennials never want to stay in their roles. Millennials are going to job hop, and that's what they love to do. It's not true. Many millennials, especially older millennials, I just saw, I think it was elder millennials, right? Geriatric millennials. And I said, oh my gosh, this is insane. But we know that they're seeking security, right? Because millennials are having families. They want to also be homeowners, right? Many of us want to be able to realize that American dream that we all have on some level bought into. And so creating these opportunities to have these discussions, to think things over, to check and say, you know what? I'm not too clear on this. We need some help. Okay, there's no shame in it, and it's so helpful for you to know what you don't know. So at this point, I am going to leave some time for questions. Again, if you have questions, please feel free, give me a call, check out the site, email. I want to leave some time in the chat just so that we can get started and having some, getting to this point. Does anyone have any questions? I'll leave some time for that. So again, perhaps we're all in the same space. Hopefully I shared some information with you that you didn't know. But again, when I think about the biases, when we think about what's headed our way, right? We're increasingly feeling a bit more comfortable coming out of the pandemic. How has this impacted your organization? How has this impacted your ability to develop effective company culture and creating a safe space? Let me know. I definitely want to see that. Okay. So I know that. Okay, we have a question. I love the idea of anonymous feedback and communication from the bottom up, but how do you recommend getting buy-in from the top level? For me, how do you come back from that from a culture perspective? There's a breakdown when the top level didn't like what they heard. Now, Leah, this is a great question. Thank you so much. And the one thing that I do, the reason why I start these workshops with getting your consent is when people start to push back, right? When we do the affinity activity, people tend to get very uncomfortable and defensive. And that's a moment for us to check in, right? I got your consent. we're clear, we are agreed in why we're here because we want to know more. And even if that makes us uncomfortable, you agreed to pushing forward and pushing through that discomfort. Now, when you're looking for buy-in, the one thing, money talks, right? No one's in business to not have their business be successful. So if you're looking to create opportunities to develop communication, again, look at what's been working and what hasn't. If your turnover churn has gone up, if you see that new associates have been leaving in less than 18 months, we know it takes about 18 months, 12 to 18 months to realize a return on a new employee. If people are leaving in less than that time, you're losing money. Okay, so that's where that buy-in comes. That's where you're saying, listen, what are we doing? Okay, and very often when I've had these discussions with C-suites, I've said, look, we will have this conversation again. I'll see you again in a year or two, but what could we have accomplished in the interim? Okay, if you've made a budget line item for bad managers, right, to deal with defending them or, dealing with a lot of these employment discrimination cases. We've had no opportunity to reflect on the culture, to even ask, is there an opportunity for growth, right? So when we're thinking about how to get that buy-in, very often my number one thing is, what is this costing us? Because culture can be costly, right? No one wants to say it, but unfortunately, it's very true. Culture can be costly. Now, again, you don't have to have kombucha on tap to be successful internally and to be successful within your industry. What you can do is be intentional about the framework for decision-making you've made and push forward from there. Leslie, thank you. I'm glad you found it interesting. Let's see if we have any other questions. I want to make sure I'm being responsive to everyone. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, anything that you wanted me to sort of, review, I think very often that strategic and operational misalignment is something that kind of gets people thinking. But otherwise, if you do not have questions, I will definitely be able to hang around to answer any specific questions. Jacqueline has one. What's a good starting point for companies that don't know where to begin building or redefining their internal culture? And I think that's an excellent question. I think the best starting point is to say why, right? Why do we want to do this? Is it because other people are doing it, right? We have the fear of missing out. We've got the FOMO, we see other people doing this and we want to do it too. Or is it because we understand that something's not working, or perhaps we're getting traction, right? We're being very successful with what we are doing and we want to push forward and do more. That, I would say, is a great starting point. And that's where, again, that know what you don't know. If you're not sure where to go from there, it's when you talk to someone like myself and say, great, what do you stand for? And that's where you do that values alignment, the values discovery workshop. Because very often people are very clear on the impact that they want to have in an industry, but they're not clear on their own identity. Right. And so that's where we engage in a bit of back and forth. We have a proprietary model that we use to help flesh out those values and to help flesh out the expression of those values within the organization so that you are developing that operational strategy. And if you're looking to redefine your culture, okay, we know what's not working. But who do we want to be, right? So if you keep coming into, you keep hitting these walls where you say, nope, we don't want to do that, right? We don't want to offend people in this way. We don't want to, create a culture of exclusion within our community, then we know that we do want to be inclusive, right? And so then that's leading you closer to where it is you think you want to be. Thank you for that question. It's a very good question.